Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So I'm in the process of reattaching the roof to one of my doll houses that I removed a couple years ago. And I debated on whether I should share this because things got a little scrappy. But I figured, why hide? I might as well let you dolls see what I do when I think nobody is watching. So from this angle, you can see that I'm trying to manually remove some decorative pieces from around the roof. Rather than conveniently using my heat gun to warm up the glue and pull it off, I was using some wire cutters. But for some reason, I was just determined I was going to break it off with the pliers. And the saddest part about all of this is that my brand new heat gun is plugged up and ready to go within a few feet of where I was working. So after I removed myself from the bad scene, I went on to work on a template. And the templates are pieces to close off both ends or sides of the roof now that I've decided to reattach it. So to give you a little context of what I'm talking about, this is a picture of what the dollhouse looked like when I originally got it before I removed the roof. Now you can see me here in this frame trying to align it on a piece of really firm cardboard, which is what I'm going to use to close up the sides. And you may ask, what happened to the original sides that closed up the roof to the dollhouse? And the answer is they are still visible on the third floor of the dollhouse in two of the rooms, and I covered them with beadboard and treated them like a decorative element. Now I can see in several of these frames I'm not being very precise about making my template because I'm using cardboard. These are scraps from some old packing boxes. Now if you were using some actual wood or something that cost you something, you may want to be more precise in your overall calculations before you cut anything. And you can see from this angle that I'm using a permanent marker to mark out where I'm going to cut the cardboard so that it'll fit under the lid. Now after the area you want to cut out is clearly marked, you can use your regular craft knife or a box cutter. Now anytime you're using your blade, I want you to be very mindful of your fingers and hold it firmly so that the cardboard doesn't slip. And when I was done, I had two roughly cut triangles, which is enough to close up both ends of my roof. Now, even before I showed you this part, you could clearly predict that there would be gapping, but by the time I complete my finishing technique and add the drywall, the beams, the trim, and some caulk, you won't be able to see it. Now in this frame, I started ripping the wallpaper off because I knew I didn't want to use it going forward. And right in the middle of that, I got inspiration about how I'm going to cover the walls. And I'll share that a little bit later in the video. Now you see me here cutting a second set of triangles to make sure the wall was nice and strong. So I'm not going to take you through that process again, but that's what I'm doing in this frame. So to be clear, I have a total of 4 triangles, 2 sets of 2, which will be glued together for added strength and support for the roof. Now I want to put out a quick disclaimer and warning to those of you who are new to the channel and are not familiar with my practices. I have a tendency to use excess glue, so if that type of content is disturbing to you, you may need to leave now. Again, for those of you who don't know, I have struggled with excessive glue use for quite some time, even prior to starting my channel, because I had a general distrust of glues and adhesive that stemmed from my childhood because I didn't know that there were different glues for different projects. And although I've grown and learned that there were different types of glues for different surfaces, I still have a tendency to use more than I need often. Now for this particular project, I think that my glue use is absolutely justified because I want these 2 pieces of cardboard to be almost like wood when it dries, which is what happens when you put glue on cardboard. It makes it extremely rigid and firm, with results similar to paper mache. Now I did the exact same thing to both sets of triangles. Now the combined triangle sets were allowed to dry overnight, and to ensure they stayed flat, I put weights on them. Now here I am the next day. My triangle sets are nice and firm. So in this case, it's crystal clear that I didn't follow the guidelines of my template, which means my triangles are too big, which for some projects would be a big problem. But for this, I just need to trim it down. And I quickly went back to my craft table and actually used my ruler to line up where I needed to cut it. Now, depending on how thick your cardboard is or how sharp your blade is, you may need to do a couple passes to make sure you cut all the way through so you don't have to tear it. And after I removed the excess, I brought it back to the dollhouse to try out the fit, and you can see that trimming off that excess resolved the gapping. Now, really quick before I start doing my finishing, I'm going to cut another set of triangles, but this time I'm not going to use cardboard. I'm going to use foam board, which I consider to be dollhouse drywall. And you may wonder why I'm using the foam board. Well, that's going to be for the inside wall because it's easier to wallpaper than cardboard. And the template and cutting process is exactly the same, so I'm not going to go into a long discussion about how I did that. Now, even though I'm going to be using wallpaper, I'm not really worried about messing up the foam board because the attic space is kind of going to be a more worn and weathered, almost neglected part of the house, so it doesn't need to be pristine. So now that the drywall template is cut, I'm going to go ahead and do my finishing technique for the outside. So here are some pre-cut egg carton pieces that I had left over from a previous project, but these pieces won't work because I need them to be more irregular like stone. And this is what I mean by a carry-out cup holder. Now here I'm just giving you a quick glance of how it looked before I added any color or anything to it. It looked very pre-K, but the finished product, I'm always really pleased with it, and I will leave a link in the description so you can see my full video of how I make bricks and stone from egg carton. So here you can see my stone exterior finish is complete, and you can see that the inside triangle, I put some wallpaper that looks like newspaper that I thought would be appropriate for the attic. And here it is all installed. Everything has been glued and balanced, and I'm really pleased about the way that turned out. Now I will add some paint to naturalize that white ridge, but I think this reattachment of the roof project has worked out really well. So let me show you how we got here. Now the third floor was created with cardboard, and then I covered it with newspaper like paper mache, and I changed the color from pink to green, and the exterior of the third floor I covered with wood siding to match the original house structure. And this is how it looks today. So let's go ahead and finish up this attic. Now in a previous video, I swiped some of the sticks that I cut for this floor, and I used them to create a floor for the reading room in the rooming house dollhouse. And if you haven't seen that video already, I will leave a link in the description. So let me gather these so I can start working on creating a floor for this attic space. Now in order to cover up that old wallpaper and to make the attic ceiling look more attic-y, I created these panel sheets with those bamboo coffee stir sticks. Now this is basically the same process or technique that I used to create beadboard, but to finish these attic walls, I'm going to install them horizontally rather than vertically. And here I'm staining it, but I'm not necessarily staining it to make it look pretty. I'm trying to knock the newness off of it and make it look more aged. Because although Miss Betty and Pop's house is a nice house, it is an old house. So an attic space in an old house would not look like new construction. Now, right after I completed my first coat, I actually wiped it down to remove the excess stain so that the color doesn't saturate too much and get too dark. Now, here I am back at the dollhouse, and I'm sizing the pieces to see how much of it I'll need to trim to make it fit the wall. Now, if you measure your template precisely and cut it exactly the same size, then you won't have to do any trimming. Now that I've got my approximate size, I'm going to go ahead and add glue to it. Now I've cut my panel down to size, and I'm checking it one more time to make sure I cut it the right length before I add glue. Now you may notice some damp spots on the brown paper bag on the back of the template. That's just from the oil from the wood stain. It's not going to hurt anything. So in this frame, I just want to give you a last glance at the attic wall or ceiling before I add my horizontal panels, because I believe that seeing before pictures help you to appreciate the afters. So here I've added glue to one of the panels, and I install it the same way I do my beadboard, except you're going to have to hold it at an angle here in the attic. And you would apply this the same way you would apply wallpaper or even some type of paneling. You want to hold it in place and make sure it makes contact with the complete surface of the wall. Now in this instance, I used a combination of the weld bond glue and a little bit of the 3-in-1 to catch things quickly. And there's my first set of panels in place and drying. And I'm going to line up the next set as well right next to it. Now you can clearly see that all of my sticks aren't even, but it's okay. I'm going to lay that panel right up against the first panel. And although the seam in the middle between the two looks a little ziggity-zag, we're not going to worry about it because we're going to cover all that up with a beam. Now here's the floor. I didn't go through the process of doing the floor because I've done several floors recently, and I will leave a link in the description for how to do my floors on the paper bag template. But I did stain it already, so I didn't show you that part, but I'm just showing you how I'm using some black paint and alcohol to put stains on the floor because I want it to look kind of dark and worn and a little bit murky because it is an attic floor. Now, this is a very, very subtle treatment. Now, if you wanted it to be really, really bad or really, really dark, you could add a lot of black and make it really dark. But I'm just kind of like making it here and there, just kind of doing it at random, just to give the faint impression of possible mold and mildew buildup or some type of dirt stain. Because in life size, if an attic is not used as living space, it's generally pretty neglected. Well, this is another little technique that you can do as much or as little as you want, depending on the effect that you're trying to achieve. Keep in mind, this is your floor. There is no right or wrong way to do it, but I will recommend that you do this in layers. So do a coat and allow it to dry and settle and see how you like it, and then look at it and determine whether you need to add more, because I think doing it in thin layers looks a lot more realistic than if you do one thick dark coat. So now you can see my natural wood stain. The color has died down a little bit and you can see my stain from the alcohol and paint wash. And now that everything is dry and the colors have settled, I can see that I'm really, really happy with the overall result. So let's go ahead and install it. So I picked up my portable floor off of my desk and brought it over to the dollhouse. And I've already added glue and spread it all into the corners. So now that I feel like I've got a nice even coat, I just plopped my floor right down and clamped it and added weights so that everything will dry nice and flat and smooth and level. And you can see from this angle that I've added my beams to cover up those seams, and the blue tape is holding those in place while they dry. So after I installed the floor, I realized that my template was a little bit short, so I had to add a few additional planks to complete the floor and extend it all the way out to the other wall. So I was really glad that I had cut extra floorboards because they really came in handy. Now, while everything was drying, I was really liking the look of everything. It looks really old and worn, and the floor looks dirty and scuffed up. But I thought it would be really nice to create an illusion as to how you get up to the attic, because there's no hole in the floor or a door to access the attic. So I decided to make another false stairwell. Now, I've used this technique several times, actually in all three of my first dollhouses. And each time I did things slightly different. Now in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and use cardboard, but I do believe I used foam board in the rooming house dollhouse attic. And with my original dollhouse, I actually did have stair railing to create the false stairwell. And I will leave links in the description so you can see both of those. So I'm going to create a very simple guard wall or guard rail around what is the imagined opening. And it's just kind of an L-shaped piece of cardboard. I'm trying to create a shape that'll look realistic and keep it within scale to the room because the ceiling is really low. Now, again, I don't feel like I need to be really precise or perfect with this because I'll make any type of modifications to perfect it and make it look a little bit more even when I add the finishing to it. And I've just added a little dab of glue here to the edge of the piece of cardboard, and I'm adding the second piece, and just for extra reinforcement I kind of overlapped it, and here I'm just pinching it with some clamps so it'll dry nice and flat. So after I added the glue and the clamps, I realized it really wasn't going to stay in the L shape and dry correctly, so I simply put a rubber band around it to help it maintain its shape while it dries. When the little short wall was almost dry, I started to play around with the concept of adding the scrap pieces from the ceiling around it so it wouldn't look like cardboard anymore. And dolls, I didn't do any precise measuring. I just kind of held the scrap pieces up to the side of the cardboard, and when I realized it was enough to cover it, I just marked it and cut it. And when I cut it, I just used my electrical scissors to cut right through the coffee stir sticks, which was really easy. And then I added glue to cover it. Now keep in mind these were scrap pieces that I was using to cover the cardboard, so I did have to splice a few of the pieces together. So I did use my spreader to make sure I got glue on all of the cardboard so that when I added my wood veneer or covering, it would be a nice, tight, secure fit. Now to finish off the raw edges, I did add popsicle stick across the top and on the side where I'm going to adhere it to the wall, so I'll be able to install it securely. And you can clearly see this is a very simple design. made merely from some cardboard and the scraps from the ceiling covering. And I think it turned out really cute. Now you can see here we are in the attic and there is my little wall. And I think it turned out really cute, and I think it's going to work really perfect in that space to just finish it off and add an additional detail. Now, if you enjoyed this video today and want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. And always look for me on Mondays after 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As usual, I always really enjoy creating these videos for you dolls, but I gotta go. So until next time, I'm looking forward to seeing you right here on Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye bye now, dolls.